For years, Windows has been the default operating system for millions of people. Whether you use your computer for gaming, work, school, content creation, or simply browsing the internet, chances are you've spent countless hours staring at the familiar Windows desktop. But in recent years, many users have started looking for alternatives. Some are frustrated with Windows updates appearing at inconvenient times. Others are concerned about privacy, telemetry, increasing system requirements, or the growing trend of cloud integration and subscriptions. Whatever the reason, more people than ever are asking the same question: can Linux finally replace Windows? I wanted to find out for myself. Instead of reading reviews or watching other people's opinions, I decided to do something much more ambitious. I would try every major Linux distribution designed to look and feel like Windows and discover which one actually delivered the best experience. My goal wasn't to find the most powerful Linux distro or the most customizable one. I wanted to find the distro that an average Windows user could install today and start using without feeling lost. The journey began with Linux Mint, the distribution that almost everyone recommends to Windows users. The moment the desktop appeared after installation, I understood why it has such a strong reputation. The Cinnamon desktop environment feels instantly familiar. There's a taskbar at the bottom, a start menu-style launcher in the corner, a system tray, desktop icons, and a workflow that mirrors what Windows users have known for decades. Within minutes, I was navigating the system naturally without having to think about where things were located. Performance was immediately impressive. Applications opened quickly, system resources remained low, and the desktop felt responsive even on older hardware. The software manager was easy to understand, updates were simple to install, and driver support worked flawlessly on my test machines. Linux Mint didn't try to reinvent computing. Instead, it focused on making Linux approachable and practical. That first impression set a very high standard for everything that followed. Next, I installed Zorin OS, another distribution that specifically targets Windows migrants. Right away, Zorin felt more modern and polished than many Linux distributions. The visual design was sleek, animations were smooth, and the desktop looked professional. The developers clearly invested a lot of effort into creating an experience that feels welcoming to newcomers. One thing that stood out was how carefully Zorin guides users through the transition process. The interface is intuitive, settings are organized logically, and many common tasks require little effort. In some ways, Zorin actually felt more polished than Windows itself. However, I noticed that some customization features were locked behind the Pro version. While this wasn't a deal-breaker, it slightly reduced the sense of freedom that many people associate with Linux. Even so, Zorin remained one of the strongest contenders throughout the entire experiment. Then came Kubuntu. Unlike Linux Mint and Zorin, Kubuntu uses the KDE Plasma desktop environment. KDE Plasma is often praised as one of the most advanced desktop environments in the Linux ecosystem, and after spending time with it, I could see why. The level of customization is almost unbelievable. Nearly every aspect of the interface can be modified, adjusted, or redesigned. At first glance, Kubuntu looked very similar to Windows. The layout felt familiar, the workflow made sense, and the desktop was visually appealing. However, the deeper I explored the settings, the more complex things became. Power users would absolutely love this flexibility, but beginners could easily become overwhelmed. There are countless options available, and while that's a strength, it can also be intimidating. Kubuntu impressed me enormously, but it required more effort to master compared to Linux Mint or Zorin. After Kubuntu, I tested KDE Neon. Since it also uses KDE Plasma, the visual experience felt familiar. The major difference is that KDE Neon delivers the newest KDE software directly from the developers. This means users receive the latest features, improvements, and innovations before many other distributions. The desktop experience was fantastic. Everything felt modern and cutting-edge. New features appeared quickly, and the system remained responsive throughout my testing. However, receiving newer software sometimes means accepting slightly greater risk. While KDE Neon was generally stable, users seeking maximum reliability may prefer distributions that prioritize long-term stability over rapid updates. For enthusiasts, KDE Neon is exciting. For average Windows users, it might be slightly more adventurous than necessary. My testing continued with Feren OS, a distribution that doesn't receive nearly as much attention as it deserves. Feren OS immediately surprised me. The desktop looked polished, the interface was familiar, and the overall experience felt thoughtfully designed. Many aspects of the system seemed specifically tailored for users transitioning from Windows. The installation process was straightforward, software support was solid, and everyday tasks felt comfortable. It wasn't perfect, but it consistently delivered a pleasant experience. If popularity alone determined winners, Feren OS might be overlooked. But after using it extensively, I realized it was one of the hidden gems in the Windows-like Linux category. I also spent considerable time with MX Linux. This distribution has developed a strong reputation for performance and efficiency, especially on older hardware. That reputation proved well-deserved. MX Linux was incredibly fast. Applications launched quickly, system responsiveness remained excellent, and resource usage stayed remarkably low. However, while performance was outstanding, the visual experience felt somewhat dated compared to competitors. Modern users often expect a polished interface alongside strong functionality. MX Linux excelled technically, but it lacked some of the visual refinement that makes new users immediately feel comfortable. For reviving older computers, it's fantastic. For replacing Windows on a modern desktop, other options felt more complete. Ubuntu was another obvious candidate. As arguably the most famous Linux distribution in the world, Ubuntu has introduced countless users to Linux over the years. Installation was easy, hardware support was excellent, and software availability was among the best in the Linux ecosystem. The challenge was that Ubuntu's GNOME desktop environment doesn't resemble Windows very closely. The workflow is different, application management works differently, and navigation requires some adjustment. Experienced users can adapt quickly, but someone expecting a familiar Windows replacement may face a steeper learning curve. Ubuntu remains an outstanding operating system, but it wasn't the Windows-like experience I was specifically searching for. I even experimented with distributions like Linux Lite, which is designed for simplicity and ease of transition. Linux Lite focuses heavily on helping Windows users adapt to Linux. The desktop layout is familiar, system requirements are modest, and helpful tools are included to guide newcomers. The experience was pleasant overall, but compared to Linux Mint and Zorin, Linux Lite felt slightly less polished. It worked well, but it lacked the refinement that separates good distributions from truly exceptional ones. As days turned into weeks, I began noticing a pattern. Most modern Linux distributions are far better than many people realize. The outdated stereotype that Linux is only for programmers and system administrators simply doesn't match reality anymore. Today's Linux distributions offer graphical software stores, automatic updates, excellent hardware support, and user-friendly interfaces. The real challenge wasn't finding a Linux distribution capable of replacing Windows. Nearly all of them were capable. The challenge was identifying the distribution that made the transition effortless. I evaluated every distro based on several factors. How easy was it to install? How familiar did it feel? How stable was it during daily use? How much tweaking was required after installation? How well did it handle software installation? How comfortable would an average Windows user feel after switching? Again and again, one distribution consistently performed better than the others. Linux Mint wasn't always the most visually impressive. It wasn't the newest. It wasn't the most customizable. But it delivered something far more important: balance. Everything worked exactly as expected. The desktop felt familiar without copying Windows outright. The software manager was simple yet powerful. Updates were easy to understand. Hardware compatibility was excellent. System performance remained consistently strong. Most importantly, Linux Mint never felt like it was trying too hard. Some distributions focused heavily on visual effects. Others prioritized customization. Some chased the latest technologies. Linux Mint focused on usability. It respected the user's time and delivered a straightforward experience that simply worked. There were moments when Zorin OS almost took the crown. Its polished appearance and beginner-friendly design made it incredibly appealing. There were times when Kubuntu's flexibility impressed me so much that I considered naming it the winner. Feren OS exceeded expectations and MX Linux demonstrated incredible efficiency. Each distribution had strengths that deserved recognition. But every time I returned to Linux Mint, I found myself accomplishing tasks more easily. The system faded into the background and allowed me to focus on what I actually wanted to do. That may sound simple, but it's one of the highest compliments you can give an operating system. The best operating systems aren't necessarily the ones packed with the most features. They're the ones that remove obstacles between users and their goals. Linux Mint achieved that better than any other Windows-like Linux distribution one tested. By the end of this experiment, I realized something surprising. The question isn't whether Linux is ready for mainstream users. In many ways, it already is. The software ecosystem has matured, hardware compatibility has improved dramatically, and user-friendly distributions have become more polished than ever before. For someone considering the switch from Windows, there has never been a better time to explore Linux. The experience is smoother, easier, and more accessible than at any point in Linux history. After installing distro after distro, testing countless applications, comparing desktop environments, and living with each system long enough to understand its strengths and weaknesses, I finally reached my conclusion. Many Windows-like Linux distributions are genuinely excellent. Several deserve far more attention than they receive. But if someone asked me for a single recommendation, one Linux distribution that provides the easiest, smoothest, and most reliable transition from Windows, the answer would be clear. Linux Mint earned that position not through flashy marketing or revolutionary features, but through consistency, reliability, and exceptional usability. It struck the perfect balance between familiarity and functionality. It respected what Windows users already know while introducing them to the advantages of Linux. I started this journey expecting a close competition, and in many ways it was. But after trying nearly every major Windows-like Linux distribution available, only one consistently delivered the complete package. Only one felt ready for virtually anyone making the jump from Windows. And in the end, Linux Mint was the only one that truly felt worth recommending to everyone.